What if I told you that the person who hurt you never actually broke you? They just revealed the parts of you you forgot existed. See, most people think betrayal is the end. That moment your heart drops, your world flips, and you're left standing in silence, shattered. But what if that silence wasn't empty? What if it was the beginning of something deeper, something stronger, something sharper? People often confuse noise for strength. They believe revenge is loud, a dramatic comeback, a viral clapback, a public burn. But the Stoics, they knew better. They knew that the most powerful transformation isn't seen in fireworks. It's seen in the way you stop chasing explanations, in the way you stop justifying your boundaries, in the way you simply walk away without burning a single bridge, without needing applause, without saying a word. Because the one thing your betrayer never expected was your stillness. They expected rage. They expected chaos. They expected a version of you that was easily shaken. But when you didn't flinch, when you didn't perform for their guilt, something happened. Your absence became a mirror, and they had to sit there and see themselves clearly, maybe for the first time. That's the moment power shifts, not when you win louder, but when you stop needing to win at all. Betrayal doesn't always break you. Sometimes it clears the fog, it strips away illusion. It purifies your path, removing people who were never meant to walk it with you. That's not cruelty, that's clarity, and clarity is brutal in the beginning. But it's also the birthplace of unshakable peace. If you've ever been blindsided, ghosted, disrespected, or used, and you still lie awake wondering what you did wrong, this message is for you. Not to heal you with cliches, not to hype you with hollow words, but to remind you of something sacred you didn't break. You just stopped pretending. And now, it's time to stop apologizing for how powerful that makes you. This is not about revenge. This is about remembering who you were before the wound, before the silence, before the mask. And if that resonates with something buried deep inside you, stick around. Because in this video, we're not just unpacking betrayal. We're rewriting what it means to rise from it with discipline, with dignity, and with the kind of stillness that rattles the very people who once underestimated you. And if this kind of content speaks to where you are in life, if you're walking through fire and quietly building a stronger self on the other side, make sure you subscribe to True Stoic Way. This is more than a channel, it's a path. And every video is designed to sharpen your mind, ground your soul, and protect your peace. Now let's go deeper. Let's explore what truly happens when you stop reacting and start becoming. The first instinct is always the same. We ask, why did they do this to me? Why did they lie? Why did they leave when I needed them to stay? Why did they change? But the question is a trap, because it keeps you circling around their mind, their logic, their choices, as if that's where the answer lives. It doesn't. You see, the moment someone betrays you, the real question isn't, why did they do it? It's, what did I just see that I was unwilling to see before? Because betrayal, for all its pain, is one of the clearest mirrors life ever holds up. It strips away charm. It exposes intent. It unmasks the smiles that were never real, the promises that were never meant to be kept, the connections that were never grounded in truth. It's not random. It's not without meaning. It is, whether you believe it or not, a form of mercy. It's reality, finally speaking without disguise. And that truth? It hurts, yes, but it doesn't harm. There's a difference the Stoics understood well. Pain wakes you. Harm distorts you. Pain says, look again. Harm says, you are broken. So understand this: when you were betrayed, you weren't broken. You were being woken up. And I know, waking up doesn't feel like a gift. It feels like standing barefoot in shards of what you thought was real. It feels like suddenly questioning every moment, every word, every glance, wondering if you were foolish or just blind. But blindness wasn't your flaw. It was your faith. You believed in someone's words. You trusted their timing. You gave them access to a version of you that was soft, honest, hopeful. That doesn't make you naive. That makes you human. And the betrayal? It doesn't erase your value. It just clarifies their zot. It doesn't prove you weren't enough. It proves they never had the capacity to receive the depth of what you offered. So let it hurt. But don't let it harden you, because the deeper function of betrayal, the part most people miss, is this. It's a filter. It removes what no longer belongs. Think about it. If someone can turn on you, lie to your face, disappear when it matters most, what were they ever doing by your side to begin with? You weren't abandoned. You were refined. The storm didn't knock you down. It swept away the leaves that were already dying. There's something strangely holy about that process. Because betrayal doesn't just take people away from you. It returns you to yourself. It calls you inward. It says, look at who's left. Not in your contact list, not in your DMIS, but in the mirror. That person, that's who you rebuild with. Not the illusion. Not the version of you that twisted yourself to be more palatable, more agreeable, more tolerable. You rebuild with the self that remained after the wreckage. And that self is honest. That self doesn't pretend. That self doesn't beg for crumbs of attention. That self remembers the silence and chose not to fill it with noise. That's strength. That's clarity. That's power. And the irony? The people who betray you rarely realize what they've done. Not fully. Not until you stop reacting. Because as long as you're explaining, performing, confronting, they still believe they hold a piece of you. But when you go still, when you stop reaching, when you simply become unavailable to their confusion, that's when the silence starts to echo. Not for you, for them. They realize they didn't just lose your presence. They lost access to something rare, your trust. And trust, once betrayed, doesn't scream. It disappears. This is why Stoics didn't chase explanations. They chased understanding, not of others, but of reality. Epictetus once said, some things are within our control, others are not. And betrayal? That's not yours to control, but what it reveals. That is yours to understand, because betrayal doesn't just show you who someone is. It shows you who you were becoming blind to. It shows you the patterns, the red flags, the instincts you ignored because love was louder than doubt. But now, doubt has done its job. It woke you up. And now you see, not angrily, not bitterly, just clearly. In that clarity, it doesn't come from revenge. It comes from acceptance. You accept what they showed you. You thank life for revealing it sooner rather than later. And then you walk. You don't explain the walk. You don't broadcast it. You just take it, because your healing doesn't require their recognition. Your evolution doesn't wait for their apology. You've already outgrown the room they tried to keep you small in, and now comes the hard part, not grieving who they were, but grieving who you thought they were. And that's okay. It means you had a heart big enough to believe, a soul open enough to trust. That's not weakness. That's beauty. But now, it's time to walk differently, more aware, more intentional, not guarded, but grounded. Because betrayal, when seen through Stoic eyes, isn't an attack. It's a reorientation, a sharp, sudden pull toward the truth. And truth is never your enemy. It's your compass. So let betrayal do what it came to do. Not to punish you, but to purify you. Let it cut away what can't come with you. Let it burn off the excess. Let it distill you down to your essence. Because the one thing betrayal can't touch is the part of you that finally sees clearly. And from that clarity, your real life begins. He didn't see it coming, not because he was foolish or naive or blind to the risks, but because he believed in something most people stop believing in: character. The man had built his business from nothing, not inherited, not given, built from the sweat of late nights, the silence of sacrifice, the kind of persistence that doesn't look impressive on the outside, but burns steady on the inside. He brought in a partner, not because he was weak, but because he believed in shared vision. Believed that trust was still a currency that meant something. At first, it worked. They talked long term, built projections, made promises, laughed in the back office over bad coffee and tighter budgets. They weren't friends exactly, but there was mutual respect, or at least that's what he thought. But betrayal never walks in loud, it slips through side doors. It started with small things, delays, vague answers, numbers that didn't add up. He noticed, but he hesitated, gave the benefit of the doubt, told himself it was stress, growth pains, a temporary misstep. Until the day the bank called. The account was almost empty. Funds had been rerouted, documents forged. The partner? Gone. Vanished overnight, taking more than money, taking the future, the effort, the foundation. And for a moment, he stood still in that office, not angry, not shouting, just still. Kind of stillness where grief and disbelief meet, where you don't cry, not yet, because your mind is still trying to catch up with the collapse. But he didn't break. He sat with the wreckage. Let the shame burn through. Let the rage flicker and die without feeding it. Let the silence speak. Because in that silence, something else arrived. Clarity. He realized it wasn't just betrayal. It was exposure. Exposure of who the other man truly was. But more importantly, exposure of where he himself had still been soft. Not soft in a weak way. Soft in a too trusting, too giving, too unguarded way. The kind of softness the world loves to exploit. And so he did the unthinkable. He didn't retaliate. He didn't post. He didn't gossip. He rebuilt from scratch, wiser, sharper, more discerning. He reviewed every contract himself now. Hired slower, paid closer attention to energy, not just resumes. He stopped assuming shared ambition meant shared values. The next project took longer. It didn't sparkle at first, but it was clean. Every dollar was accounted for. Every step was intentional. And this time, when the prophets came, they didn't just bring money. They brought something deeper, discernment. And that was the real gain. You see, the first betrayal took away what he built. But the second version of him, it couldn't be taken, because it wasn't built on assumptions. It was built on principle. That's what people don't understand. They think betrayal ruins a man, but it doesn't. It trains him. It sharpens what was dull. It closes the doors that should have never been opened. It upgrades the blueprint, not just of his business, but of his entire identity. He no longer sought validation from partnership. He no longer mistook proximity for loyalty. He no longer believed that shared dreams meant shared discipline. He had learned the cost of assuming everyone builds like he builds. And with that lesson came a strange kind of freedom. He was no longer afraid to start over. He knew the terrain. Now, not the landscape of profit, but the terrain of people. He could feel insincerity in a handshake. He could spot manipulation wrapped in compliments. And most of all, he learned to trust himself more than the illusion of alignment. The pain still visited him sometimes. Late at night, when no one was watching, he'd feel the echo, the what-ifs, the should-haves. But he didn't stay there, because he had turned pain into structure. And that structure, it stood unshakable. Because the second time around, it wasn't just business. It was character in motion, discipline wearing skin, boundaries turned into bricks. And here's the truth that Stoics understood long before us. You don't become stronger by avoiding pain. You become stronger by confronting it and refusing to let it define you. The betrayal, that was never the enemy. The enemy was what it tried to plant inside him: bitterness, cynicism, retreat. But he chose differently. He didn't let the actions of one man write the story of all men. He didn't let one fracture become the framework of his future. He healed, not by forgetting, but by remembering correctly. He didn't say, "I was stupid." He said, "I was open." He didn't say, "I'll never trust again." He sighed, "Next time, I'll trust with eyes wide open." That is the discipline of a Stoic man, not to erase what happened, but to extract the lesson, remove the poison, and keep walking with a cleaner heart. He became someone who didn't flinch at betrayal anymore, because he knew it doesn't destroy the right person. It refines him. And the ones who betray, they never get that, because they always measure victory in what they took. But what they never realize is that what they took was temporary. What you build after, that's yours forever. They expected noise. They always do. When someone wrongs you, betrays you, mocks you, they don't just anticipate a reaction. They count on it. They want to drag you into their chaos, to make you play the game they know how to win. Anger, argument, explosions, exposure. Because in that world, the world of emotional reaction, control is easy. They speak that language fluently, but when you don't respond, when you say nothing, when you stay still, that's when everything changes. That's when their strategy starts to collapse under its own weight. Because silence, not the kind born of fear, but the kind born of discipline, is a force they never learned how to counter. Marcus Aurelius once said, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy." And this is what that means. Not to mirror their rage, not to stoop to their volume, not to let your peace be set on fire just to make a point, but to remain composed, still, untouchable. Because when you don't flinch, when you don't justify, when you walk away without performance or permission, you win. Not the kind of win they understand. Not one with applause, but the kind that lives in your chest. A stillness that says, I am no longer available for chaos disguised as connection. That silence, it's not a retreat. It's a message. It says, I saw what you did. I understand who you are now, and I've adjusted my access accordingly. And the truth is, they hear that silence louder than your words ever could. See, they wanted to provoke you. That was the test. And the test wasn't whether or not you could fight. The test was whether or not you had to. Anyone can clap back. Anyone can lash out. But to remain unmoved, that takes something more. It takes discipline, self-respect, restraint. It takes the understanding that your time, your energy, your mental space are sacred. And you don't offer them up for cheap battles with small minds. That's not pride. That's sovereignty. And the more silent you become, the more people reveal themselves. You'll notice it. When you stop defending yourself, people either show up with accountability, or they disappear because accountability was never there. Intention. Either way, you win. Because the point was never to convince them. The point was to stop needing to. That's the Stoic edge. Not apathy, but clarity. Not shutting down, but shutting out the noise that once diluted your direction. A man who knows himself deeply doesn't bark at every threat. He evaluates. He asks, is this worthy of my voice? Is this battle aligned with who I am or who I'm trying to stop being? Most often, the answer is no. And when it is, he steps back. Not out of weakness, but because silence has become his sharpest sword. You see, anger burns hot and fast, but silence burns clean. It leaves no smoke, no trail, only mystery. And nothing unsettles your enemies more than being unable to predict your next move. They'll talk, they'll guess, they'll provoke. But the moment you refuse to enter the room they've set on fire, you've already won, because they can't fight what won't engage. They can't control what won't explain itself. They can't shame what no longer seeks approval. That's where your power lives now. Not in reaction, but in refusal. And if you're learning how to walk this path, if you're choosing presence over performance, stillness over shouting, dignity over dominance, then you're not alone. That's exactly why true Stoic way exists. Not for men who want to make noise, but for men who want to build weight. Not temporary strength, but deep, unshakable roots. This is a place for those who are learning how to respond less and become more. So if you feel something shifting inside you, if you're growing quieter, firmer, clearer, then subscribe. Not because we're chasing numbers, but because we're building something different. A community of men who don't perform power, they embody it. Now, let's go back. Let's return to you. To the version of you that once needed to explain, to defend, to speak louder just to be heard. Let him rest. He served his purpose. He fought the early battles. But now you've evolved. Now you carry something more valuable than the last word. You carry peace. And peace, true peace, is terrifying to people who live off control, because they don't know what to do when you stop fighting. They don't know how to hold power over someone who doesn't flinch. You've become unreadable. Not because you're hiding, but because you've stopped giving your power away in the form of explanations. You walk into rooms and people feel the difference. You say less. You watch more. You conserve your energy like a man who understands its worth. And that is unteachable. That is earned. So let them wonder. Let them sit with your silence. Let them feel the absence of your performance and realize they never knew the real you to begin with. Because from now on, you don't speak to be understood. You exist to be respected. And if they can't respect your silence, they were never meant to be trusted with your words. It doesn't happen all at once. You don't just wake up one day immune to their absence, unaffected by their silence, untouched by their distance. No, it happens gradually, like fog lifting from a field. At first, it's murky. You're unsure. You still check your phone. You still wonder if maybe, just maybe, they'll come back, explain, undo the damage. But then comes the moment, not loud, not dramatic, just still. You're standing in the same space, but something has shifted. You're no longer waiting, and that's when the real rebuilding begins, not of the old self, not of the version that needed to be chosen, validated, reassured, but of the self that was buried beneath apology, performance, compromise. You start to breathe differently, not lighter, deeper. You stop rehearsing the pain. You stop chasing explanations, and suddenly, their rejection doesn't sting in the same way, because you've outgrown the need for it to make sense. It wasn't personal. It was projection. It wasn't a reflection of your worth. It was a revelation of their capacity, and that revelation saved you, because now you're free. You're no longer bending to be acceptable. You're no longer shrinking to be tolerated. You're no longer walking on eggshells in the name of harmony. You're simply walking, clear-eyed, silent, and they notice. They may not say it, but they do, because the you they once manipulated, once dismissed, once underestimated, is gone. Not bitter, not vengeful, just gone. And in their place stands someone they can't predict, can't influence, can't label. They may reach out. They may watch from a distance. They may try to re-enter the story they abandoned. But you're no longer in that chapter. You closed it, not with hatred, but with understanding. And that understanding, it made you sovereign, because the truth is, you didn't change. You returned to your instincts, to your inner compass, to the self that always knew, but kept quiet. For too long, you stopped performing. You started choosing. You stopped pleasing. You started honoring. And in that shift, something remarkable occurred. You no longer needed to be seen. That was the chain, the need to be witnessed, understood, accepted. And once it broke, you became untouchable, because the person who walks without needing applause moves with power no one can take. Rejection taught you that. It showed you who had access to you and who no longer deserved it. It burned away the illusions that love guarantees loyalty, that kindness will always be returned, that showing up means they'll stay. You stopped blaming yourself for their absence. You stopped tying your value to their presence. And in that silence, in that sacred aloneness, you met someone. Met you. Not the curated version, not the polite mask, but the raw, unedited self. The one who doesn't chase closure. The one who doesn't over-explain. The one who doesn't dilute truth just to be palatable. And that self doesn't fear rejection anymore, because it knows, if you can walk away, you were never truly with me. That self doesn't beg to be chosen. It chooses. It chooses peace over attention, solitude over false connection, truth over comfort. You see, rejection didn't diminish you. It purified you. It revealed the layers you had worn for so long, the laughter that wasn't yours, the boundaries you erased to keep the peace, the tone you softened just to remain in the room. But now, those layers are gone, and what remains? Solid, still, sufficient. You've become a person who can sit in silence without reaching. A person who can feel the ache without collapsing. A person who no longer negotiates their worth. Because worth now is not up for negotiation. It's not dependent on who stays. It's not defined by who sees it. It just is. And it radiates, quietly, unshakably. There was a time you needed to prove you were good. There was a time you needed someone to say you mattered. But that time has passed. Now you live in alignment, not for display, not for applause, but for yourself. They may call you cold. They may say you've changed. They may not recognize the version of you that no longer bends. Let them. They never saw you fully anyway. They only saw the version that softened itself to fit their comfort. But you're not here to be digestible. You're here to be whole. Rejection didn't close your heart. It opened your eyes. And now you no longer flinch at the sound of their name, because it doesn't hold weight. Not because it's forgotten, but because it no longer defines you. You're not the one they rejected. You're the one who rose through it. So walk slowly. Walk deliberately. Walk with the kind of self-trust that doesn't need company to feel strong. You don't need to be followed. You don't need to be understood. You just need to keep walking. Because every step you take now, it's not just distance from the past. It's direction toward the self you were always meant to be. And that is the gift no one can take, not even those who left. Some people learn to fight through noise, but others, the rare ones, learn to sharpen themselves in silence. They take the pain, the rejection, the betrayal, and instead of lashing out, they do something more dangerous. They become disciplined. You see, pain wants to make you react. It urges you to respond quickly, loudly, emotionally. But a Stoic knows that reaction is not power. Reaction is submission to chaos, to ego, to the very people you swore you'd rise above. So they pause. Not to avoid the fight, but to choose the battle worth fighting. Because here's the truth. Pain is inevitable, but how you process it, that's your weapon. And discipline, true discipline, is what turns pain from a wound into a forge. It's what keeps your feet steady when the ground shifts. It's what holds your voice back when your pride begs you to shout. It's what wakes you at dawn when no one's watching, and no one's clapping, and no one's validating your effort. It's the voice that says, I don't need the world to understand me. I need to understand myself. Because once you've been betrayed, once you've been abandoned, once you've stared into the hollow eyes of someone who smiled while cutting you. You learn that trust must be earned, slowly. That peace must be protected, fiercely. That strength isn't shown in how loud you speak, but in how clearly you move. Discipline is the quiet art of becoming unshakable. It's not glamorous. It's not sexy. It's not shared on highlight reels, but it is sacred because it means this: you are no longer ruled by impulse. You are no longer steered by approval. You are no longer dancing for acceptance in rooms that insult your soul. Instead, you move with rhythm, not to please others, but to honor your code. And that code? That's the difference between collapse and clarity. People often confuse discipline with rigidity. They think it's about rules and restrictions. But discipline, at its core, is about freedom. Got the freedom to walk away from what doesn't align. The freedom to say no without guilt. The freedom to train your body, your mind, your habits, not because anyone is watching, but because you are. It's choosing discomfort now, so you don't suffer later. It's showing up to the task even when motivation is gone. It's keeping your standards even when no one else holds theirs. It's knowing that every temptation to break your values is a test, and every test passed is another brick in your fortress, because that's what discipline builds: a fortress, not made of stone, but of intention, awareness, consistency. Inside that fortress, you, not as the wounded one, not as the betrayed one, but as the version of yourself that rose from the ruins, not loud, not broken, but home. They thought pain would make you crumble, but it made you clean. It made you precise. It made you focused in a way that fear can't shake and flattery can't distract. Now, when you speak, it's measured. When you move, it's deliberate. When you fall, you get up with form, not fury. That's the Stoic revenge, not confrontation, but elevation. You stop living to prove them wrong. You stop training to be seen. You stop building to impress. And instead, you become sovereign. You own your time. You govern your emotions. You command your direction. There's a man somewhere who was laughed at, abandoned, forgotten. He took the ridicule, the failure, the pain, and instead of becoming bitter, he became better. He showed up earlier. He read more. He lifted heavier. He spoke less. He focused deeper. Not because he wanted them to come back, but because he never wanted to return to the version of himself that needed them. That's discipline. That's power without noise. Strength without spectacle. Victory without vengeance. And yes, some people won't understand you anymore. They'll say you're distant, colder, harder to reach. Let them. They don't realize they're no longer supposed to have access to you, because when you become disciplined, you become different. You don't argue anymore, you execute. You don't chase anymore, you choose. You don't complain, you correct. That's when they notice. They don't see your pain. They see your presence. They see a man who doesn't flinch when tested, who doesn't fold when ignored, who doesn't beg when abandoned. And that's what makes you dangerous in the most beautiful way, because the most dangerous man is the one who no longer reacts. He just refines. He doesn't fight for control. He is control, not of others, but of himself. He holds the line, quietly, relentlessly, and that line, it becomes the boundary that chaos cannot cross. That's what they never expected. That's what betrayal gave you, not scars, but structure, not rage, but reason. Not a reason to strike, but a reason to rise. Because discipline isn't about punishment. It's about preparation. It's the art of becoming ready, not for battle with them, but for alignment with yourself. The man who builds with discipline doesn't burn bridges. He outgrows paths. And when they look back, they won't see the man they betrayed. They'll see the one they created. By mistake. You didn't roar back. You didn't broadcast your healing. You didn't script a comeback or stage a spectacle. You just returned. Not to them, but to yourself. And that was the most powerful thing you could have done. Because silence, when born from discipline, doesn't signal absence. It signals completion. It says, I no longer live in the room you destroyed. See, they expected the usual script. The angry messages, the desperate calls, the breakdowns. They expected you to perform your pain, because that's what they understand, performance. But when you didn't, when you stopped reacting, when you didn't chase, didn't beg, didn't explain, something inside them cracked. Because silence, real silence, isn't empty. It's filled with presence. And your presence now, it speaks louder than any reply. You show up. Not with vengeance, but with vision. Not with bitterness, but with balance. Your life moves forward. Calm, deliberate, focused. And they see it. Even if they don't say it. Even if they pretend they're unbothered. They feel it. Because nothing screams louder than the absence of chaos. And you've become so quiet, they have to lean in to notice. But when they do, they realize they're no longer welcome in the story. Not because you hate them, but because you've outgrown the version of yourself that needed to be understood. You're not angry. You're not waiting. You're whole. And wholeness, true, grounded wholeness, cannot be faked. It cannot be mimicked. Because it doesn't depend on external validation. It's not born of revenge. It's born of resurrection. That kind where you return to prove something. The kind where you return unrecognizable. Because the man they hurt, he's gone. And the one standing now, he's built different. He doesn't speak to convince. He doesn't perform to be forgiven. He simply walks in alignment with his values, his direction, his peace. They thought they buried you, but you were soil, and everything they tried to kill only fed your roots. Now, your silence doesn't just say, I've moved on. It says, I no longer need closure, because I've already closed the chapter with discipline, not destruction. That's what they never saw coming, because they thought the final blow would be yours, an angry reply, a public takedown, a dramatic exit. But instead, you resurrected quietly. You changed your routine. You focused on your craft. You protected your mornings. You guarded your time. You loved without needing permission. You let your silence build a life they no longer fit in. And by the time they noticed, you were already too far gone, not above them, beyond them. And that difference matters, because people will always try to return when they think you still live in the same place emotionally. But when they knock and find no one home, when they call and you don't flinch, when they mention your name and you're not even listening, that's the moment they realize you didn't just heal. You evolved, and your evolution wasn't for them. It was for you. Because true resurrection isn't about returning to the same table that once starved you. It's about building a new one where peace is the guest of honor, and your soul no longer compromises for company. Let your silence say everything. Let it echo through the spaces where you once over-explained. Let it replace the paragraphs you used to send. Let it stand taller than any speech ever could. because in that silence, you've become fluent in something they never learned. Peace as posture, stillness as statement, presence as power. You've become the man who walks into a room and doesn't need to be noticed, because the air around him shifts anyway. The man who doesn't need to defend his name, because his energy speaks for itself. The man who no longer waits for apologies, because he's too busy living a life that no longer depends on anyone's regret. And that life? It's not loud. It's not flashy. It's anchored. And that's the final blow they never recover from. Not your rage, not your revenge, but your rebirth. The fact that you kept showing up to yourself, even when they disappeared, even when they doubted, even when they lied. You kept rising, one early morning at a time, one honest conversation at a time, one firm boundary at a time. You didn't seek revenge. You sought restoration. And in doing so, you became untouchable. Because the man who no longer explains himself, the man who no longer chases closure, the man who can sit in silence and feel nothing but peace, that man is free. And freedom, real freedom, is never earned through noise. It's earned through restraint. That's what Stoicism teaches us, that the highest form of strength is not domination, but discipline. That the final form of healing isn't confrontation, but clarity. So let them speak. Let them imagine you're bitter. Let them project their chaos onto your calm. You don't need to respond, because silence is the answer. You no longer explain your silence. You no longer clarify your peace. You no longer stand up just to be seen. Because the man who lives in alignment doesn't perform. He embodies. There was a time you needed people to understand you, to believe you, to validate your worth. But now, you walk with your eyes forward and your shoulders steady. Not because everything is perfect, but because you are no longer disturbed by imperfection. You no longer crave applause, because applause is noise. And you've grown addicted to clarity. You no longer chase justice, because your justice is this: you kept becoming, even when they left, even when they doubted, even when they mocked. You didn't stop, you didn't explain. You just moved, one decision at a time, one disciplined choice at a time. Until one day, you looked in the mirror and realized you no longer recognized the version of you that used to beg for proof. That man is gone. And in his place stands something rare, a man at peace with who he isn't, utterly unconcerned with who others think he should be. That's sovereignty. It's not loud, it's not dramatic, it's unshakable. You don't wait to be chosen. You select, you discern, you walk away, not with spite, but with certainty. Because when you know your value, silence is louder than arguments, presence is stronger than performance, and walking away is more powerful than staying to be seen. So let the world keep shouting. You'll be over here, building in quiet, living on purpose, becoming a legend not in lights, but in discipline. And when they ask, where did he go? Let your absence be your answer. When they wonder, why isn't he speaking? Let your peace be your response. And when they finally realize they no longer have access to you, let that be the lesson they never expected to learn. You don't live for revenge. You live for readiness. You don't live to hurt them. You live to honor what it took to become this version of you. And now, if you've walked this far with me, you know what kind of man you're becoming. disciplined, decisive, dangerously. Silent dot. So subscribe now, not because this video moved you, but because you're ready to move differently. This is the true Stoic way, and your path is just beginning.